I went away for just 3 days, a simple work trip. I left my cozy little home, watered my plants, locked the front door, and kissed normally goodbye without knowing it. When I returned, my house was gone. Not physically, but legally stripped from me, like it was never mine to begin with. The front door had a new lock. My key no longer worked. A paper taped crookedly to the window declared, "Sold at public auction by the HOA." I stood there, suitcase in hand, jaw on the floor, heart trying to catch up with the nightmare unfolding in front of me. And just when I thought things couldn't get more surreal, there she was, Karen, arms folded, that same smug smirk stretched across her face like she had just won the lottery. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Next time, follow the rules." That moment burned into my memory. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't even begin to imagine, was that she hadn't just started a petty little HOA war. She had lit the fuse to a full-blown neighborhood revolution. You see, I may have lost my house, but I was about to gain something much bigger. 3 months before that disaster, everything was peaceful. The sun rose gently over manicured lawns, birds chirped in polite decibels, and mailboxes stood in strict alignment approved by the HOA. I had moved into the neighborhood 2 years prior, hopeful for peace, a decent investment, and a place to call home. I didn't know I was moving into a regime disguised as suburbia. Karen ran the HOA like a tiny dictatorship, using the neighborhood handbook like a sacred text. Her voice echoed through every meeting. She had power, and she loved every drop of it. I didn't bother much with the HOA in the beginning. I paid my dues, kept my lawn trimmed, even bought a mailbox in the exact color code listed in the welcome packet. But the first encounter with Karen came over a set of wind chimes. Not loud ones, not offensive, just something my late grandmother had gifted me. Within 2 days of hanging them, I got a violation notice on my doorstep, sound ordinance breach. I chuckled at first, thinking it was a mistake. I was wrong, dead wrong. Karen fined me $50. I paid it in pennies. I thought it was funny. She didn't. That petty little joke kicked off a one-sided war I didn't ask for. Every week, a new violation arrived, such as grass too long, leaves in the gutter, or the trash bin left visible for 8 minutes too long. I started taking pictures, time-stamping everything, covering my bases. But Karen wasn't after truth. She was after control. I began attending HOA meetings, trying to challenge some of her absurd enforcement tactics. But every time I spoke, she shut me down with the same rehearsed line, stating, "These rules were voted on by the board. If you'd like to make a change, you're welcome to run for a seat." Of course, she conveniently left out the fact that she manipulated the board into silence with threats, gossip, and an exhausting amount of passive-aggressive Facebook posts in the neighborhood group. The final straw came when I received a violation for an unapproved porch remodel. I stood in disbelief, staring at the paper. My porch hadn't been touched since the day I moved in. I tried calling the HOA office, but they referred me to Karen. She wouldn't take my calls. Then, a certified letter arrived. I owed a $1,200 fine and had 30 days to comply or face legal property action. I had had enough. I filed an appeal, sent proof, photos, everything. Silence. Then came the trip, a simple and innocent work conference of 3 days. When I came back, everything had changed. I tried to unlock my front door, but the key didn't fit. A small crowd of neighbors watched from behind curtains. I felt their stares, confused, embarrassed, powerless. That's when Karen appeared, with a cold bottle of sparkling water in one hand, sipping like she was enjoying a front-row seat to a show she directed. "You were warned," she said casually, like she hadn't just ruined someone's life. I called the police. They came, checked IDs, read the papers, and told me there was nothing they could do. "It's a civil matter," they said. "Take it up with the HOA or in court." I felt like I was in a dream, one where the ground beneath your feet keeps shifting every time you try to take a step forward. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a cheap motel room with my laptop, reading HOA bylaws, auction procedures, and county property laws until my eyes burned. The house had been listed as delinquent, sold at an online auction with barely any notice. I traced the buyer's name. It was registered under a Shell LLC, one that had a mailing address suspiciously close to Karen's husband's law firm. I didn't eat for almost 2 days. My life, my savings, my stability. It had all been stripped away. I showed up at the next HOA meeting, eyes bloodshot, heart thudding like a war drum. Karen wouldn't let me speak. "Only current homeowners may address the board," she said sweetly. I clenched my fists. I walked out, but not before I made eye contact with every board member and said just one word: war. And that was the moment I changed. No more Mr. Nice Neighbor. Karen had taken everything from me, but she made one colossal mistake. She underestimated what I was willing to do to take it back and more. That night, I made a call I hadn't made in over a decade. I reached out to someone I never thought I'd contact again, a relative who owed me a favor, one who had more money than Karen could ever dream of, one who, when I explained what happened, simply replied, "How many houses do you want to buy?" I laughed for the first time in days. I actually laughed. "All of them," I said. And that's where this story really begins. I didn't just lose a house. Karen handed me a reason, a fire, a mission. She thought she could ruin me with paperwork and HOA power games. But I had something she didn't. I had nothing left to lose. And when a person with nothing left to lose starts playing the game, they don't play by the rules. They rewrite them. The next morning, I returned to the neighborhood, not as a resident, but as an outsider. My house stood there mocking me, a familiar shape now lost to unfamiliar hands. The blinds were shut. The porch light was on, though I hadn't left it that way. I stood on the sidewalk like a stranger visiting a memory. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Belton, who used to wave at me every morning, peered out her window, then quickly pulled the curtain shut when our eyes met. Word had already spread. Karen must have celebrated it like some personal victory. I could imagine her passing around flyers or making some gloating announcement in the HOA Facebook group. The silence around my old house wasn't peace. It was fear, tension, and control. I walked to the HOA office later that day, desperate for answers, hoping there was still a shred of logic left in the mess. The front desk lady, a young woman named Jenna, didn't even make eye contact as she passed me a copy of the auction notice. I scanned every line. It said my property had been seized and sold due to unpaid fines. The list was staggering: violations for a porch that was never remodeled, weeds that didn't exist, a plastic Halloween skeleton left on the lawn too long, even a complaint about the scent of my barbecue being disruptive to community harmony. Fines had accumulated silently, while my appeals vanished into some black hole. The final straw: an automatic clause in the HOA's governing documents stating that non-payment of fines after a 90-day period could result in the home being listed for auction. No court required, no legal challenge offered, just signatures from the board. I asked who bought it. Jenna hesitated, said it was confidential. But I wasn't stupid. I knew the game now. This wasn't about violations. It was about power, and Karen had all of it. I left without saying a word, fists clenched, mind racing with questions that only made me angrier. How could this be allowed? How had no one stopped it? And most of all, how had I let it happen? I sat in my car outside a run-down motel later that night, thinking about every decision that led to this point. I remembered the first time Karen fined me. I laughed it off. The second time, I rolled my eyes. The third time, I joked about it with coworkers. But this wasn't a joke anymore. This was war. And the worst part? It was legal. The system had loopholes the size of swimming pools, and Karen had learned to dive in head first. My belongings gone, either sold, trashed, or absorbed into the house. My childhood photo albums, my tools, the signed guitar from my college band, disappeared with the stroke of a pen. I hired a lawyer the next day, a sharp guy named Tony who specialized in HOA law. He listened to my story with a mix of amusement and disbelief. When I showed him the documents, he leaned back and whistled. He said I might have a case, but it would be an uphill battle. Karen had filed everything by the book, technically. The law didn't care about truth, only about procedure. Still, he promised to dig. Maybe we'd find something. A discrepancy, a forged signature, an unpaid tax, anything. Days blurred together. I lived out of the motel, scrolling through legal forums, reaching out to ex-residents who had clashed with Karen before. One man, an old veteran named Chuck, told me she'd once fined him for having too many flags in his yard. He moved out a month later. Another couple claimed they left after their kids were accused of excessive noise during a lemonade stand. This wasn't new. Karen had been pushing people out for years, and now I was just her latest trophy. Then something strange happened. A neighbor I barely knew, a young woman named Brianna, messaged me on social media. She said she'd seen something weird. The new owner of my home had pulled up in a black SUV with no plates. A man got out wearing a hoodie, checked his phone, then walked straight to the door without even knocking. Brianna took a photo. I recognized him immediately. It was Marcus, Karen's nephew, a shady real estate flipper who'd been circling the neighborhood for months pretending to be a landscaping contractor. That was the link. Karen hadn't just stolen my house. She handed it off to her own family. My rage hit a new level. I forwarded the photo to Tony. He said it wasn't enough for legal action yet, but it confirmed our suspicions. Karen had manipulated the system for personal gain. Maybe, just maybe, we could prove intent. If we could, it might unravel the entire sale. Still, that would take months. Courts don't move fast, and I was running out of time, money, and patience. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to be thriving. She hosted a community barbecue that week, posted pictures on the HOA page of smiling neighbors, grilled hot dogs, and decorations paid for by HOA funds. My old yard was in the background, my swing, my fence, my tree. They'd set up a bouncy house right where I used to park. Karen's caption said, "A fresh start for our beautiful community." I stared at that post for 10 minutes, hand trembling over my phone, trying to decide whether to scream, cry, or throw the phone across the room. I did none of those things. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in over 15 years. My uncle Rehan was a ghost in our family, a recluse, eccentric, and wildly successful in the tech world. He made his first fortune designing security software, then disappeared into private investments and luxury solitude. No one talked to him much, but he owed me. Years ago, when he was on the brink of being scammed out of millions by a fake charity, I'd helped expose the fraud. He never forgot it. When he picked up the phone and I explained what happened, there was a pause. Then he said, "So they took your house?" I said yes. He said, "Let's take theirs." He arrived 2 days later in a jet black Tesla with windows so dark you couldn't see inside. He stepped out in a tailored suit, like he was about to buy a company, not visit a suburb. We didn't hug. We just looked at each other, two men ready for something bigger than revenge. He opened his briefcase and showed me documents, properties listed for sale, houses around Karen's, the one she had her eye on. And one surprising detail, Karen's own home had a mortgage close to default. Her husband had financial troubles. Her empire wasn't as secure as she pretended. That night, we formed the plan, quiet, strategic, ruthless. Rehan would start acquiring properties around the neighborhood through shell companies, bit by bit, house by house. No one would know who was buying. And while we bought, we'd plant seeds, new tenants, renters who weren't afraid of Karen, people who broke all her precious rules. We wouldn't just take down her house. We'd dismantle her power, her control, and her identity, one house at a time. As I lay in the motel bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had nothing, but I had purpose. Karen thought she'd won, but she didn't realize she'd created her worst nightmare. Because I wasn't just coming back for my house. I was coming for the whole neighborhood. The first house was a quiet corner lot with a red mailbox and peeling shutters. It belonged to an elderly couple who had been trying to sell for months, but hadn't found a buyer because Karen's HOA had scared off every potential offer with ridiculous neighborhood demands. Rehan's team made an anonymous cash offer through a third-party company, and the couple accepted within hours, no questions asked. Within a week, the title was transferred. That was the first domino. What followed was a methodical and strategic campaign that no one saw coming. Rehan had contacts in real estate, finance, and legal sectors. Every move was planned like a chess match. Properties around the neighborhood, especially the ones Karen had repeatedly targeted with violations, were quietly purchased under different LLCs. Rehan used different agents for each deal, different company names, and sometimes different cities to throw off suspicion. Within the first month, we owned 6 houses. By the end of the second month, we controlled 11. Each house was then rented out to people Karen couldn't stand. Families with kids who played outside past 7 p.m., artists who painted their garages in wild colors, a group of old friends who hosted weekly barbecues and refused to put their trash cans out in neat, symmetrical rows. Karen was drowning in violation notices, but none of them worked. The new residents either ignored the fines or contested them legally. Karen's HOA meetings started turning chaotic, with residents questioning her authority and wondering why so many new people seemed unaffected by the rules that once ran the community like clockwork. I rented a house directly across from Karen's. It was the 12th house we bought. The moment she saw me unloading boxes from the moving truck, her jaw dropped. She came storming across the street, clipboard in hand, acting like nothing had changed. She said I was trespassing. I smiled and handed her the lease. She read it, lips twitching. Then she looked up and said, "You won't last long." I smiled again and said, "I think I'll be just fine." That night, I held a lawn concert, a small gathering with local musicians, food trucks, and string lights. It was beautiful. Kids danced, parents laughed, and music filled the air. Karen called the police 3 times. Each time they arrived, they saw valid permits, low volume levels, and a community having harmless fun. She stood on her porch, fuming like a volcano ready to erupt, but with no one left willing to fear her. Then came the real move. We had discovered that Karen had been operating the HOA under a contract with a third-party management company. That company was under review due to several legal complaints in other neighborhoods. Rehan reached out, offered to buy the contract outright with a generous price. They agreed without hesitation. Just like that, the entire HOA management fell under our control. No board vote needed, no warning. The next HOA meeting was legendary. Karen walked in with her usual stack of violations and agendas, completely unaware that everything had changed. When she sat down at the head of the table, a representative from the new management team politely asked her to step aside. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then she saw the paperwork. Her face drained of color. The representative read aloud the updated bylaws, showing that Karen was no longer president. Her title, power, and privileges were stripped. She wasn't even on the board anymore. The room fell silent. Then someone clapped. One by one, people joined in. Karen stood there, frozen, gripping her clipboard like a life vest in a sinking ship. She stormed out without a word. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply watched the neighborhood begin to breathe again. But Karen wasn't done. She never was. 2 nights later, someone broke into the house I was renting. They didn't steal anything. They trashed the living room, tore down the art, and left muddy footprints across the carpet. But they didn't know I had installed cameras everywhere. The footage showed Karen wearing a hoodie and gloves, creeping around like a thief in the night. I sent the video to the police. They arrested her the next morning. The mugshot appeared online within hours. She was charged with trespassing and property damage. Her reputation took a massive hit. But still, she fought back. She filed multiple lawsuits against me, against Rehan's companies, against the new management. Each one was poorly written, emotionally charged, and thrown out almost immediately. The court filings became a joke around the neighborhood. One resident printed them out and made a Karen's claims wall where neighbors could pin their favorite quotes. It was cruel, but the damage she had done to so many people made sympathy a scarce resource. Her own husband began to pull away. Rumors spread that he'd been secretly trying to refinance their house to avoid default. Karen's legal drama, coupled with her growing paranoia, had pushed them to the edge financially. She stopped appearing at community events. Her front yard became overgrown. The once pristine porch where she used to sip coffee and glare at people now had chipped paint and a broken chair. She was unraveling. We continued to buy more homes, more influence. The neighborhood shifted from her sterile, overly regulated design to a lively, diverse community. Kids rode bikes without helmets. Lawns grew with personality. One resident turned their backyard into a chicken coop, and no one complained. There was laughter again, real laughter, not the fake, clipped kind used during HOA speeches. Still, Karen couldn't let go. She started showing up uninvited to HOA meetings, shouting from the back, trying to disrupt the new order. But no one paid her attention. She had become background noise, a relic of a forgotten regime. It was almost sad. Almost. I spent my evenings walking through the neighborhood, now alive with movement and sound. I greeted new residents, shared stories, and made sure they knew that no one would find them for chalk art or mismatched shutters. People waved back. Children ran past with sparklers. Dogs barked freely. The neighborhood was finally ours. One evening, I stood outside Karen's house. The windows were dark, the mailbox stuffed. A foreclosure notice was taped to the door. It was only a matter of time now. Her empire had crumbled, piece by piece, until all that remained was a hollow shell. And when the final blow came, it wouldn't be with a bang. It would be with a sold sign in her own front yard. I had lost my house. I had been humiliated. But in return, I had built something stronger than a home. I had built a community, one free from tyranny, one that remembered what it meant to live without fear of a clipboard and a fine. Karen thought she could destroy me, but in trying, she handed me the keys to everything she cared about, and I was just getting started. The auction was held on a bright Saturday morning in the same county office where my house had been sold just months earlier. It felt poetic, almost cruelly perfect, like the universe had designed this moment with ironic precision. Karen's house, her pride, her fortress, her throne, was now up for public bidding. The same legal loopholes she had once weaponized were now slicing through her life with surgical accuracy. I sat in the back row of the small, fluorescent-lit room, watching the clerk shuffle papers and call out bids like it was just another day. But for me, and for Karen, it was a day that would never be forgotten. The bidding started modestly, then climbed quickly as investors tossed numbers into the air, most of them unaware of the personal history stitched into the very walls of the home they were fighting over. I remained silent, letting others wear themselves out. Rehan's financial advisor nudged me. When the time was right, I raised my paddle and named a number that silenced the room. No one challenged it, not because it was high, but because of the timing. People could feel something in the air. I wasn't just buying a house. I was buying justice. When the gavel hit the desk, a strange silence followed. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I simply stood and walked out, the keys to Karen's kingdom already being prepared in a manila envelope behind me. Later that evening, when the deed transfer was made official, I stood on her front porch, staring at the chipped paint and sagging flower beds. This house had once glowed with false power, with the illusion of control. Now it looked like a haunted monument to everything Karen had built and lost. Inside, it was worse. The furniture was gone, sold in a desperate attempt to pay legal fees. The walls were bare, the carpet stained, the air stale. It no longer felt like a home. It felt like a ruin. And yet, standing there, I felt something close to peace. I had walked into this house once as a victim, powerless and humiliated. Now I walked in as the owner, as the man who turned her tactics against her, who refused to bow and instead stood taller with every blow she tried to land. I didn't plan to live there. That wasn't the point. Instead, I turned it into something entirely new. I called it Karen's Corner, a themed Airbnb designed to attract guests who loved HOA horror stories and suburban drama. Each room was decorated with nods to the chaos Karen had created. The living room featured a fake violation notice framed on the wall. The bathroom had a guest book titled, "Write Your Own Citation." It became an overnight sensation. People from across the state booked weekends just to say they'd stayed in the house once ruled by the most infamous HOA president in town. The irony, it was zoned for short-term rentals now, something Karen had fought tooth and nail to prevent during her reign. As word spread, Karen disappeared from public view. Her name vanished from the HOA records. She stopped attending meetings. Her social media accounts went dark. Some neighbors whispered that she'd moved in with a distant cousin across town. Others claimed she was living in a run-down trailer outside the county line. But one thing was certain, her power was gone. The neighborhood no longer feared her. It had been liberated, and everyone could feel the difference. Kids played freely again. People painted their houses in colors that made them smile. The energy had shifted. It felt like life had returned. I started getting messages from residents of other neighborhoods, people trapped under the weight of their own local Karens. They wanted to know how I did it, how I turned the tables, how I reclaimed what was mine. That's when the idea came. I launched a YouTube channel called HOA Horror Stories, sharing everything I had been through. The violations, the auction, the revenge. I featured interviews with neighbors, attorneys, and even guests from Karen's Corner. The channel exploded. People related to the stories. They laughed, they raged, and most of all, they realized they weren't alone. In one episode, I walked viewers through the exact steps I took to buy back power from within. I didn't just focus on Karen. I focused on the system, how it allowed people like her to thrive, how unchecked power could turn a friendly neighborhood into a silent prison, and how, with the right tools and just enough persistence, anyone could take that power back. Meanwhile, Karen's life continued to unravel. One day, I received an alert from a property management app, one used for rental inquiries. Someone had applied to rent one of the homes in our growing portfolio. The name on the application was familiar, too familiar. It was Karen. Her last name had changed, but the photo attached was unmistakable. She looked tired, worn down by stress and time. I didn't know whether to laugh or feel sorry for her. In the end, I declined the application. Politely, of course. She received a standard rejection email, like everyone else. It wasn't about revenge anymore. That part was over. What remained was something better, something lasting. Karen had taken my house, my comfort, and almost my peace. But in doing so, She gave me a purpose. She forced me to find strength I didn't know I had, to fight back with intelligence and precision, and to rebuild not just a home, but a community, a stronger one, a freer one. The HOA was restructured entirely. New board members were elected, people with empathy, transparency, and a sense of humor. The bylaws were revised to remove ridiculous fines and punitive measures. Decisions were made democratically. Enforcement became about safety and maintenance, not personal vendettas. The residents felt like they had a voice again, and I, the man who once stood on a sidewalk with a suitcase and nowhere to go, was now seen as the reason everything changed. Sometimes, late at night, I would walk past my old house, the one Karen had taken from me. The new owners had decorated it beautifully. Lights in the garden, laughter from the patio, bikes scattered across the lawn. It no longer looked like mine, but that was okay. I had something better now, a story, a legacy, and a neighborhood that would never forget what had happened. One evening, I spotted Karen sitting at a diner just outside town, alone, hair tied back, stirring a coffee she wasn't drinking. She looked like a ghost of herself. She didn't notice me, or maybe she did and chose to look away. Either way, I walked past her, nodded at the server, and stepped back into the night. Sometimes victory doesn't come with cheers or confetti. Sometimes it comes quietly, with a sense of balance restored and the knowledge that you didn't just win, you changed the game forever. And that, more than anything else, was the final move Karen never saw coming. The mornings in the neighborhood felt different now. The air was lighter, the sounds more natural, untouched by the silence of fear that once hovered like a fog over every lawn and sidewalk. I walked slowly through the streets I had fought for, not with fists, but with patience, planning, and persistence. Kids raced on scooters, dogs barked happily behind white picket fences, and neighbors waved without glancing over their shoulders first. The feeling was hard to describe, like witnessing something that had been dead come back to life and smile at you. What had once been a neighborhood ruled by fear was now a place where people felt free to express themselves. Front yards were alive with creativity, colorful flower beds, homemade decorations, wind chimes that Karen would have found in a heartbeat. But now they rang without judgment, little melodies of victory. The HOA board held monthly meetings that felt more like community potlucks than cold lectures. People actually attended because they wanted to, not because they were forced to defend themselves. That shift, that subtle but powerful shift, was the real reward. Every now and then, I'd stop outside Karen's old house. The sign on the gate read, Karen's Corner, but it had evolved beyond the joke it started as. The Airbnb had become a local attraction known for its ridiculous decor, its sarcastic nods to HOA insanity, and the fact that it was once the seat of a suburban tyrant. Guests would leave notes in the guest book like survivors of a strange adventure. Some even brought their own citation ideas to add to the growing list of fake violations framed inside. It had turned into a monument not just to Karen, but to every person who'd ever been harassed over mailbox colors or lawn heights. One guest, a middle-aged man from another state, left a comment that stuck with me. He wrote, "This house taught me that standing up might cost you something, but giving in costs even more." I read that line 3 times, and each time it hit deeper. That was what this had really been about, not just reclaiming a house, not just bringing down Karen. It was about reclaiming the idea of community itself, a place where people lived, not just obeyed, where children laughed without a stopwatch ticking in Karen's head, and where adults didn't fear a pink slip taped to their door. The YouTube channel continued to grow. HOA horror stories turned into something more than I ever imagined. People wrote in from across the country, sometimes even from other countries, sharing their experiences with overreaching associations and power-tripping neighbors. Some stories were funny, some were heartbreaking, but all of them were real. I featured the ones that mattered most, the ones that reminded people that they weren't alone. And as it grew, so did something else, a sense of accountability spreading through these communities. I started hearing from HOA boards themselves. Some thanked me, some hated me, but all of them listened. And that was enough. Karen, as far as anyone knew, kept a low profile. She tried once or twice to regain footing. One of the residents told me she applied to join another HOA board in a neighboring community. Her application was rejected before it even reached the voting stage. Word travels fast. Her name had become a cautionary tale, not just here, but beyond. There was no need to destroy her further. She had done that herself. Sometimes I'd wonder if she sat somewhere, watching it all happen, watching the people she once ruled over now thriving without her. Maybe she hated it. Maybe she regretted everything. Or maybe she was still convinced she had been right all along. Some people never change. But the point was, it no longer mattered. One afternoon, I hosted a community gathering. Nothing fancy, just tables with food, music from local artists, and games for kids. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a reminder. A reminder that neighborhoods could be more than battles over power outlets and window blinds. They could be families, friends, laughter. I stood at the edge of the crowd for a moment, watching as people danced, talked, smiled like they meant it. For a long time, I had felt like an outsider in the place I once called home. Now I felt like part of something better, not because I had forced it, but because we had all earned it together. Later that evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and pink, I sat on the front steps of the house I now called home. Not the one Karen took from me, but the one I chose afterward, a place I had built with clear eyes and steadier hands. It wasn't just about bricks and paint. It was about what I carried with me, a strange gratitude, even for the chaos. Because without it, I might have stayed silent. I might have kept my head down forever. But Karen's mistake was thinking that taking my house would break me. What she didn't understand was that it woke me up. I thought back to the first night I came home and found a different lock on my door, that feeling of helplessness, of standing on a sidewalk like a guest in your own life. It used to haunt me, but not anymore. Now it felt like a chapter from someone else's story, someone who hadn't yet discovered what they were capable of. We don't always get to choose how the storm hits us, but we do get to decide what we build when the sky's clear. Before heading inside, I took one last walk around the block. It was quiet now, soft and calm. A cat jumped from one fence to another. Someone was playing jazz music in the distance. Porch lights flickered on one by one, like stars joining the sky. And in that moment, it hit me. I hadn't just bought back a neighborhood. I had helped bring it back to life. And sometimes, that's all a place needs. Someone brave enough to say no, patient enough to wait, and stubborn enough to win. I reached my front door, looked back once, and smiled. Not the smile of revenge or victory, but of peace. The story had started with a door I couldn't open. Now it ended with one that welcomed me.